providers or our state staff is the cost of staff that do case management, that help with job development, screening, assessment, those types of things. That's not considered administration for that cap amount. Something that comes up quite a bit, some people call it reserves, other people call it carryover. Um, we're not required by the feds to spend the entire annual amount within the year. So anything that isn't spent in that year, we can carry over to a future year. And there isn't a limit on the amount of time that we have to spend that funding. But when we do spend it, we have to spend it for the same types of things that we would have originally spent it on, those kind of 4 broad categories. Another piece that is somewhat interesting if you're doing budgeting and this is a state budgeting piece, there's a concept called mandated caseload or non-mandated caseload. And that is a definition that our Department of Administrative Services develops and is part of how we build our biennial budget. So the budget, we start with what's called the base budget, which is basically the amount of budget that you have coming out of our February short session. And that's the basis of the next biennium's budget. And then there's some calculations that we do in order to determine basically what's called the continuing service level, or what would it cost us to continue to run the same program that we're currently running. And so in those calculations, we get to do things like add an inflation factor, um, like phase out, which is take money away for programs that are ending partway through a biennium, or add additional money in for things that started partway through a biennium. So we do a lot of things like that. Another piece of that is we get to account for changes in caseload for programs that are considered mandated. And the way they define mandated is programs that are required by the federal government. So those are your federal entitlement programs, or programs that are in the state constitution or required by court action. And they have determined that our TANF program doesn't meet those requirements, so it's not considered a mandated program. So what that means is that when we build the next biennium's budget, we aren't allowed to automatically add funding if the caseload is projected to increase. And what we have to do is put it into what's called a policy option package, which requires additional kind of approval in order to get that funding built into the budget. Something else that, because of that, it kind of brings up the impact that changes in caseload can have on how we spend our TANF. And because TANF is kind of that set amount, if your caseload goes up or goes down, then of course the amount that you end up spending on that caseload is going to be different. And so we've done just some high level calculations just so you guys have in your mind kind of what impact does that have. And based on our current cost per case for a TANF case, for about every 1,000 cases that are either increased or decreased, it basically costs us around $6 million a year for each 1,000 cases. So that's something that as you kind of think about things going forward, might be handy to have in your pocket. Okay, so now we get to, I think, what folks have really been wanting to know, like how have we spent our TANF money? So I was asked to kind of show where did we have it budgeted versus kind of how did we actually spend it. So I took the last full biennium of information that we have and laid out the different areas where and this is all based on our TANF federal funds. So you can see how we originally had it budgeted to be spent, and then based on the actual spending that we had last biennium, where did we end up? And then the percentages kind of show you of the actual spending, what percent was spent in each of the different categories. So you can see that about 78% of our TANF funds last biennium was spent in the self-sufficiency area, with the majority of that being in the self-sufficiency programs, which include the TANF Basic, jobs, the domestic violence, family support and connections. There's a little bit of money in the refugee program, and then the substance use disorder child care program has a little bit of TANF in it. There's also funding that goes in to pay for staff. So that's what you'll see as the self-sufficiency, and that's delivery and design. So that's field staff and central office staff. So they're the ones that do eligibility, case management, training, responsible for policy changes, all that kind of stuff. There was also about 13% that we spent in the child welfare programs, with the majority of that being on their program side, which includes funding that pays to foster parents who are taking care of foster kids, residential. So some kids are in residential group home settings. There's some for services that go out through system of care, and some other for mainly foster care prevention type stuff, which is similar to family support and connections types of activities. And then a small amount that also went for child welfare staff, mainly for covering the case management activities. Then there was also between our central and the state assessment and enterprise-wide costs, which we also sometimes call SAEC for short. That is about another 8%, 8 or 9%, give or take. And that's really for the running of all of the rest of the agency. So that includes, budget. So, a little percentage of my time would get charged there. That's also the cost of running the one eligibility system, for doing quality control, for funding our HR staff so we can hire staff, for communications. It's also facilities, our telecom. It's the cost that DAS charges us for overall running of state government.
Hey, Angela,
Mhm,
sorry to
sure.
interrupt, but would it be okay if folks ask questions as we go along?
Yes,
I
and
think Bill has his
yeah,
hand up.
if there are hands, I might not notice them. So yeah, please.
Yeah, Bill has a question.
Thanks. I apologize. I didn't want to, you're on a roll, Angela. I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Two questions I have. And forgive me, I should probably have this on my fingertips, but when we're talking around some of the self-sufficiency programs, especially when you're talking about the scope that you have for TANF around pregnancy prevention, is there any money allocated or earmarked for things like My Future, My Choice for the pregnancy prevention comprehensive program?
I do not believe that we have any TANF funding going into My Future, My Choice. I believe there's different federal sources that pay for that.
Thank you. And the other was around the child welfare program where it's prevention services. I know with family preservation, is this capturing and reflective of the family preservation, or is that a separate pot of money outside of prevention?
Um, the new stuff that they're talking about is outside of this. This is some other foster care prevention contracts and things that they've had for quite a few years.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Patty
Okay.
has a question.
Yes, my question has to do with the amount budgeted versus the actual expenditures.
Mhm.
And it may be that you're going to cover that, but that's a significant difference, and I wonder why.
I was just getting to that, so thank you. That's my next note. So yes, you will notice that the actuals are quite a bit lower, somewhere around 95 million lower. And the main reason for that, last biennium had to do with COVID and the fact that because of COVID, we had reductions in our TANF caseload. And also the child welfare caseload declined, We also had reductions in spending in the jobs program, for instance, where, folks weren't going in person to receive those services. There weren't jobs for folks to go and try to get. So we had overall reduced spending in those areas, which
Does that then go into carryover?
it does.
Okay.
Yes, that
That's
fed
the-
right into and was the major reason that we had significant carryover coming into the current biennium. And that's what fed into conversations in February session about some of the new investments that were made into the budget for the current biennium.
Thank you.
Which I think leads us into the next slide, which is how the current biennium is laid out to be spent. And so this does include the additional, I think it was 25 or 26 million in February session that they've added into TANF cash assistance and family support and connections. I think were the two main areas that included the clothing allowance and some of the expansion of family support and connections of funding. So that should all be reflected in the numbers that we have here budgeted for the current biennium. And you'll see that the percentages in each of the major program areas aren't significantly different from the actuals last time. One thing that we did change in the budget this time is a change in within self-sufficiency, where we're spending more of the federal dollars within the jobs program and less on the staffing side than how we had budgeted last time. And basically, we swapped around where we're spending our maintenance of effort versus our federal dollars. And all of these numbers are based on the fall forecasted numbers, which at that time we had about 16,000 projected kind of average caseload for TANF Basic, UN, and the domestic violence programs. The latest spring forecast actually is projecting we'll have about 2,000 more cases on average for this biennium. So you could assume that we'll probably spend another 12 million above what is showing in the approved LAB, just based on those other averages that I gave you earlier about what it cost for an additional 1,000. So then moving on to the other side of the story, which is maintenance of effort. So the states don't require us to like match dollar for dollar, but they basically said that when TANF was implemented, when they got rid of AFDC, that states had to continue to spend state dollars at a level that was equivalent to what they were spending previously. And that spending still has to achieve one of the 4 TANF purposes. So we don't have to spend at the 100% of what we spent previously. The main level that they'll talk about is an 80% level, which if you don't meet work participation, you have to spend at the 80% level. If you do meet work participation, which Oregon does, then you get to drop that down to 75% of your prior spending. If you don't meet that level, then there are penalties, and they basically take dollar for dollar away from your federal dollars if you don't spend your state dollars. And I think there's probably some other penalty pieces. It's a little more complicated than that, but that gives you an idea. In Oregon, our 75% level is 91.6 million each year that we have to spend in state funding in order to maintain that level. And the majority of that actually does come from the state general fund that we spend in ODHS. In those same program areas, mainly self-sufficiency, some of our central and shared areas. But in addition to that, we do get maintenance of effort that comes from our partners at Oregon Food Bank, at education from pre-K stuff, from housing, mainly the Housing Stabilization Program. There's some funding that we count from Child Support Division, and then there's some tax expenses and some childcare expenses that we call the double count maintenance of effort, that we get to count the same dollars that count towards childcare development block grant maintenance of effort. So we get to double count certain state dollars that way.
We have another question from Patty.
Great.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I'm sorry to go back for a second. I may just be misreading this, but what I calculated was that there was $104 million carried over from 2019 to 21. Mm-hmm. And the original request was 337 million. But in the slide you showed us on 2021 to 23, it has only a total of 315 million. So that's less than the biennium before. Yep. And doesn't seem to incorporate that carryover money, which I know you don't have to, but I'm curious about what happened to that money and whether this the one you showed us on 2021-23 includes what happened in February or was before that.
It does include what happened in February, but February didn't fully spend all of the carryover in this biennium. But what it does do is, especially the things like the clothing allowance, it allows us to spend down that carryover over the next basically 4 years. And then at the end of 4 years, there will have to be a general fund investment put into the program in order to maintain those things, because we will have spent all of that funding down by that point in time.
So that'll cover $104 million over 4 years? It's that much money?
So they put in what was basically 25 million additional per year.
Okay, got it. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right. And again, any changes in caseload, if our caseload starts to increase, we're going to spend that money down sooner and have issues sooner. And any changes that that all of you guys recommend, we'll have to relook and see how does that change how this spending of all of this would play out. Okay, any other questions?
Sorry, yeah,
if not, go ahead.
Effort. I just, this is Alicia, I'm trying to understand, how does it work when it's external spending, like the food bank or others? How does that, I just don't even have a sense of how that works or how that looks.
Yeah, so it's either, and it can be from different sources, but it's basically state or local spending. So it might be in the case of like housing or child support, some of those others, it's their state general fund that they aren't matching to any other federal funds for services or programs that still would meet some of those purposes. For the food bank, it's mainly what they provide us is volunteer, the cost of volunteers that come in and work, and we get to count that.
So, am I understanding it right that it's like money that's, I guess, not necessarily about the food bank, but like the housing program, money that is going to support people who would be eligible for TANF that is state money without another federal match, and then it can be counted as TANF. And that's why I would imagine like childcare and some of these other programs can all count. The food bank one seems a little, just really like, could you do that with any nonprofit if you had that ongoing relationship, or why is it the food bank?
You may be getting more into detail on the requirements of maintenance of effort than what I can answer.
I can answer that in part. This is Patty Whitney Wise, and I was here when that happened with the Oregon Food Bank. I thought it was also the money that the state gives to the Oregon Food Bank for the emergency food system too that counted, and that they included some of the volunteer as well. And I believe it was part of an agreement where that way the state was able to put more of their resources into other TANF activities when it happened. I don't know at this stage how much it is, but that is how it happened originally. So Alicia, it is possible that there may be other nonprofits that could do this. It was a special session agreement at one point in the past.
Any more questions for Angela? And we can also, you know, if questions don't occur to you immediately, we can also, at the end of the presentation, do another round of questions as well. Miguel and John.
I think I'm going to hand it over to John to speak a little bit more about the numbers that are on the screen, because he can do that a lot better than I could. And then I can assist with any questions. For the Mo piece really quick, I do want to mention that there's like, for all of the partners that we have, there's also very detailed reports that we need to collect and information from those served and all that. So that's, we do have those partnerships, but they do also have to provide us a little bit more detail so that we can count that towards the Mo.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to start with the next slide before we go into the support service spending, because the next slide actually takes the jobs, TANF jobs budget and breaks down how we allocate that. And if we can, is there any way to make that bigger? I'm imagining it's a little hard to see there. So what we do at the beginning of each biennium, we get a projected budget. Actually, it's quite early before the biennium starts. Around October, November, Angela's shop produces what is a projected part of the TANF budget, which will go to the TANF jobs program. And so based on that projected budget, we go through it and we break down based on caseload and some history of support service spending, how we're going to allocate out to the 16 districts for their job services contracts and an allocation for support service spending in each of their districts. As you can see, this is where we came. We put a comparison chart of the prior biennium of what that allocation came out to be for each of those districts. And then at the beginning, as you can see, we actually made a very pointed effort to get more of these dollars out to the districts this biennium than last biennium. In prior bienniums, there's been more centralized holding of some of these dollars for certain programs. Jobs Plus, we play for the a few other things centrally, but we were able to do a much closer analysis, and we cut those into levels that we felt like we could invest out into the service delivery areas much more effectively. And so, as you can see, based on our initial calculations and formula for contracts for this biennium, we allocated out about $40 million, and for support service dollars, we allocated out about $33 million to the districts. Now, as they go through and do their contracting, these dollars change just a little bit in exactly how much is out there, but it's pretty close. I think we ended up closer to about 42 million in contracts and about 31 million allocated for support services. So I could go down and name each and every one of the counties that each of these districts belong to, but we don't need to do that today. We'll, if you want, we can provide a district map and things so you know which those correspond to. So we can probably go to the previous slide then. And start talking a little bit about support services. In fact, in order to do this, can I take control? I want to share a different screen that I've got, because I want to show you what took place over since the pandemic. Let me try this again. Can you all see my screen okay now? So each month, I pull a report from Angela's shop and I track the support service budget. This is from last biennium. This is what took place last biennium with our support service spending. The beginning of the biennium, we should have been averaging our allotments out, should have been about $1.2 million a month. The first 6 months of last biennium, we were spending pretty much on an average. A couple months were over, a couple months were under. And then as you see right here, everybody knows what's happened in March of 2020. We basically shut down a lot of the programs and everything went virtual. It was hard we couldn't engage families in person. And many things took place. So as you can see, the rest of that biennium, our spending average just went completely underneath. We were spending about a quarter of what we should have in a number of these months. Okay. So as you asked, Angela, and obviously not all of the carryover stuff came from the jobs part of this, but a significant amount did. At the end of, based on my numbers, it was about a $10 million underspend last biennium. So with that, I've got this biennium. This is what we're seeing so far. We're actually starting to see a little bit of an increase. We're seeing more engagement happen with the families. And the thing that I'm extra happy about is this last 4-month trend line starting to move up. We still should be spending about $1.2 million a month in support services. The last full month I've got so far, February, we spent 760. So we're still under. Now, if you project all that out and averages, right now, I would project an underspend of about 15 million. But as this continues to move up, that's sort of a moving projection. So I wanted to let everybody see what the pandemic did to this program, because it really did decimate our ability to engage with families and work with them in the way in an investment. Okay. So I will go, I've got the thing, so I'll just continue through that. So this here is what I just showed you on those full out ones. This also takes, and Miguel, I believe, pulled this one together by the type of expenses that we pay in support services. This breaks that down to what has been spent by category in support services. And then by district here, this is a little bit different than the number I pull. The number I pull, I get from budget, and they take each month that everything that's went through there and been paid out is the number I get. These are numbers that come off of our one system, and sometimes, for example, our child care, there might be a delay from the time it's billed to the time it's paid, things of that nature. So just a little bit different. So I'm showing we've spent probably a little bit more than this in my numbers, but it's pretty close. So that's sort of the support service spending budget part. I did already go over sort of the allocation and how we get to those numbers. This last one, we have 80 different contracts throughout the state. Each of the districts works on local level. Most of our contracts are very locally based in the TANF jobs program. And what that Before I go on, I see Annie, you have your hand up. I would imagine that's something about support services. So can you go ahead and
It is. I was really curious if I could get a snapshot of that because I have my own programs here and I keep track of everything, you know, like clothing and hygiene and everything we're spending. I'd really like to see where if we are matching what, you know, not matching the exact number, but, you know, around the same thing. And, you know, maybe we can find out a plan to, sorry, I'm getting attacked by my cat. we Toby, stop. That we can maybe see if there are some sort of common solutions on how to fix. I don't want to use the word fix, but kind of fix a problem in regards to like clothing, hygiene, gas cards, bus passes, things along that line. I'm just really curious about other programs and how they're spending their TANF, TANF contracting funds, and also if SNAP contracting funds.
well, this is specific only to TANF, this snapshot. The SNAP STEP program is completely different source of funds, completely different way of, there's actually different guidelines from the feds on that. And so I can, yeah, this is definitely public knowledge stuff, but to compare the two programs, it's a very distinct programming and how, because the feds are very much more directive on the SNAP funding sources. And we don't get to build in a whole lot of flexibility to it. So that's why it's sort of interesting to try and make the comparison about what happens in TANF and SNAP STEP. We're trying to bring them closer and closer together, but it is a very difficult. The feds are much more, this is what you can spend on in the SNAP STEP in that 50-50 match program versus the flexibilities we can and are continuing to build into the TANF side. So definitely we would, whatever information you want to look at and see, but I just wanted to make sure there's a very good understanding of the distinctness of those, what we're allowed to spend on in those two programs. Okay.
Yeah, I understand that, but looking at that, the percentages look very close to the percentages of my SNAP program. Just saying, you know, comparing the SNAP, that's what put a light bulb in my head.
Okay. Good. You know what we could do on that, we can reach out and have a discussion around the SNAP STEP and do a comparison with you on that, Annie, in your program if you'd like.
That'd be great because I do keep numbers and statistics and who's in our program. We go down to, you know, if they're in the LGBTQ community, non-binary, binary. So we get down to, I wanted to collect that data so we know that we're reaching the people that we want to reach, in other words.
All right, great. Miguel, did you said you wanted to call out something on the.
Oh yeah, so on this on the spending here where you see, where is it, dependent care, so that is our direct payments to providers out of our direct payment unit, so they're, you know, getting monthly bills or whatever. And then the child care, a couple lines up, that's for items such as registration fees, annual fees that families may need to provide. So that's why you see the two differences there. So one is ongoing childcare needs, the others are just like registration fees and those other little random fees that may pop up that we help families cover.
Venus has a question.
Yes, Venus.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, I'm just curious because we're here in this time of inflation. I was just curious if these numbers are adjusted for what's coming in the next 2 to 3 months, because the CPI is showing that we're about at 7%, between 7 and 8%, but really we can't really trust the CPI because it's been manipulated once again from back in the 70s when they did it, and they just recently did it behind closed doors to completely take out housing and food, which kind of falls in our lap. So I was just curious, when we're talking about clothing, childcare, food, and things like that, in that list, is the agency prepared for the price of inflation? Because if we
Well,
looked at it, it's 17% rather than 7%.
You know, the one thing I would say we're not prepared for it, but I would also say, being that we've been so underspent, we have an
a low
opening
cushion.
here, you
Okay.
know, to work on this. One of the things that, as you see, it doesn't show housing on here, but this other, we do have a flexibility where we do pay housing support services. And for whatever reason, the way it, when one was first being developed, our eligibility system, housing wasn't really a flexible spending place that we could do. And so it didn't get coded in there. So we coded under other. So as you see, it's one of our highest support service spending categories. And most of that is the housing. Now, obviously some other things go under there as other, but mostly it's that. And to your question, yeah, you know, when we get an allocation, it is what it is. And so adjusting for inflation in the middle of the biennium is hard. But once again, the factor that we've been underspending, we have the ability to, you know, adjust how much we're giving to folks in support services as they're asking those needs to be met.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And I'm glad we've been conservative on this budget, because my second question was, what was the other? So you answered that. So that was quite a big number.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
Sorry,
Yes.
John, we've had so many questions, but I want to jump in really quick. Did I just understand what you said, right? That so we're spending still about 50% of our support service dollars a month. So there's about $500,600,000 that we could be spending to help support folks in housing right now.
There's, in all of those categories, yes, there is the opportunity to be able to do some of this stuff. Now, one of the things that there's a couple of districts is actually in their contracting, they contracted with their community action organizations and are actually doing some housing spending out of that contract instead of getting tracked on this. And I'll show you that in the next slide. But also, you know, this is one of those things as we pointed out in this group before, as the engagement takes place, then the needs are more found in conjunction with the family. And so as our family coaches, as we open up more community-based visiting and home and going out and engaging those families, we see that the identity of IDing of what is needed happens, and this starts moving up. But yes, you know, the other thing, this gives me, this 1.2 is what we would spend if we were spending on a regular level. I haven't broken down, well, if I take now then and add this, what all we've saved up to this point so far, this average is probably up quite a bit higher. I didn't throw that analysis in. So you actually, instead of just saying we can spend, you know, 500,000 more, it's probably quite a bit more than that, because we have so much saving. And each month that as we underspend, that savings is greater. And then therefore in this biennium, we have more opportunity to spend. So, okay. So back to this one. This last slide that I have, each month, as I was saying, we have 80 contractors in the jobs program throughout the state. I have to sign approval invoice for every one of those. And so I track as all that spending comes in. We break it down on their invoice by the activities they bill for. These are the jobs activities that we can set up contracts for. One of the things I'll point out down here, some of our contracts, we have built in some support services for. And as I mentioned, a couple of the districts contracted with our community action organizations. So there's another $600,000 that's been spent in housing support services through the contracts. But as you can see, the jobs program, you know, it's first, when it was first developed, it was very employment and training focused. Go get somebody a job, get whatever job, that's what they need to do. We've complete the family engagement model really changes that to, you know, there's quite a bit of employment and training based stuff here, but there's also, as you can see, there's stabilized living, there's rehab services, medical related services. We try and build, we have built this to be to the extent we can so far, wraparound based in, we sit down with the family. There's an assessment that takes place with the family around 18 domains, and based in those, we develop plans in conjunction with that family. And what we've tried to do with our contractors is find those service providers that can provide within those domains that we're assessing to, and help the families and get them there. Now, obviously, we're not completely there throughout all of the state. And that's one of the things that we want to continue working with. And that's what I'm hoping that this group really helps us with too. Patty, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Just briefly on the information before where you said because you're not spending as much each month, there's money there to help address additional needs that show up for inflation and everything else. Do you have to go back to the legislature to get that approved, or do you have the flexibility with those funds in the budget to just go ahead and spend them as needed?
With support services, the key factor right now is that the family has to have a jobs plan, a personal development plan. And if they do, then we can be quite flexible. Now, there are some rules that, you know, for example, housing is not just, right now in our rules, it says, Miguel, help me, it's like 3 months up to $3,000 or something like that. But I mean, we're constantly talking about that because there are some flexibilities built into this that we don't necessarily always have to go back to the legislature and ask about all of those flexibilities. As long as right now, as long as they're connected with a plan, that is really the key in being able to sit down and work through those. Now, there are certain things that we can't right now pay that might be on the table. You know, some things with, you know, if they've criminal past and fines and things like that, where, you know, it would be helpful to pay some of that, but there's always been, you know, different things that are in rule that we'd have to look at more and more. But and Miguel works a whole lot on those type of things with us and stuff. So
the other thing I noticed, and this is probably just, I probably know the answer to this already, but that tuition is not included in a lot of instances. Could that change because this money is there, or is that a federal requirement?
Actually, if you see right down here, support service contracted tuition, there is some availability. We're working on making more flexibility towards that. One of the things that we've really worked on over the last 2 bienniums is really gearing towards, let's get folks into training and vocational training and things, instead of just going and getting whichever job, because what we've found, and, you know, I've been with the agency for 29 years, and this is what I found, you know, used to it was just get them a job and okay. Now it's, let's find a career pathway in conjunction with these folks so they can really make the strides. But we also know that we have to help them through lots of situations that they have found that they're in, and we're working on that. And that's why the mixture of a number of the other services there that help them get through those things. So
thank you. I think that's really, really helpful and something for us to think about as we look at the TANF redesign. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think I want to just call that we have time, and I think this kind of tees us up maybe for a deeper dive in into support services for next time. So exactly right, Patty.
You want me to quit sharing now, or do you have any?
Oh, yeah. Are there any more questions?
Any more
I want to be
questions?
respectful of folks' time.
Okay, I'm gonna quit sharing then. Okay.
Thank you so much to Angela, John, and Miguel for presenting today. I think, you know, folks, let me know if you don't have this budget presentation. And if there are questions that come up over the course of the week, please don't hesitate to reach out if we can answer those. I think this tees us up for a really good conversation next week on support services and how we can use the funding that we do have to help people immediately. So kudos to Alicia and Patty for flagging that. Anything else before we go? Well, thanks everyone.
But just a thank you to the presenters. I think we can't wait to hear more as we keep going in this.
I agree. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for sharing the information.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care all.